So, it was a spring evening after a heavy rain where the air was very heavy during the night. There was a smell of moss that came from the ground, and every sound seemed even more sharper in the dark. My boots sank into the mud, with each step echoing within the stillness. I carried a flashlight, and the beam cut across the slick path near a wetland. At first, I thought the ground was alive with raindrops that were shimmering within the light. The shapes were inching their way across the trail, fragile, determined, and one traveling from the forest to the wetland. I crouched down, wondering what it was, and it was a salamander. Salamanders are very small and vulnerable. With one wrong step, one passing of a car driving across the street, and the fragile life could end. Yet together, something larger was going on. A migration, a pulse of light that was happening much longer than you and I had been around. Only then did I realize that salamanders were crossing the road to go to vernal pools. Salamanders are more than just small creatures. They are the living barometers of wetland health. Because they breathe through their skin, they are incredibly sensitive to the changes in water quality, pollution, and habitat loss. When these salamanders disappear, it is the first sign that something is going completely wrong. Long before we notice the changes in the water or in the trees. The patterns tell us many different stories. When they arrive late to breeding pools, it signals that rainfall patterns have shifted. When their numbers thin, it points to fragmented forests or polluted streams. Even though we rarely see them, salamanders are among the most numerous vertebrates within our forests. The abundance means that they quietly hold our fragile ecosystems together. This isn't just a theory. This is something that I do currently in my own research. I study how landscapes change and what those changes mean for the creatures that depend on them. I use maps, satellite imagery, and ecological models. I look at where these beautiful creatures should thrive, and I compare these with predictions to what I find in the field. The research has taught me to look at patterns, but looking at salamanders tells me what these exact patterns mean. Places where the data shows stress, declining vegetation, fragmented wetlands, places that salamanders are fewer, where the nights are quieter, and where the absence speaks louder than the presence. The research also gave me numbers. Salamanders also gave me stories. Together, they share the same truth. Salamanders are not just data points. They are signals, living indicators of resilience or decline. Salamanders do not exist in isolation. They are bound to wetlands, breeding pools, migration paths, and damp soil that shelters them. When they thrive, wetlands are healthy. When they are in decline, wetlands are sending us a clear warning. Once I learned noticing salamanders, I started noticing the wetlands that depend on them and the stories that these wetlands were telling. A great example in Vermont, the Otter Creek wetlands and floodplains shielded the town of Middlebury through Tropical Storm Irene, absorbing the floodwaters that could have caused catastrophic damage. Also, another quirky point is that The wetlands prevented $1.8 million in flood damage during that single storm alone, and saved the community about between $126,000 to $450,000 a year. I get asked this question a lot. Imagine for a second that there was no wetlands. What would happen? Floodwaters would run in, unchecked, into cities, towns, and they would destroy the homes and the infrastructure within these cities. Also, drinking water would be more polluted and stripped of the natural filtration wetlands provide. There are many species that depend on wetlands for homes. Not only salamanders, but frogs and birds, fish, amongst other vertebrates and invertebrates. They would vanish and the web of life would begin to fray. So communities would not only lose protection, but they would also lose the sense of place and wonder that these wetlands bring. Another interesting fact is that wetlands store an enormous amount of carbon. So when they're destroyed, carbon is released back into the atmosphere, which in turn will speed up climate change. So protecting wetlands isn't just about the small creatures, salamanders, frogs, or even the communities, like for example, Vermont. It's about safeguarding the resilience of the planet itself. So what makes these moments powerful? It's not just the creatures, it's the way we, as a whole, notice them together. So I remember walking with a friend one evening. There was salamanders crossing a path, and my friend asked me, and he said, "Have you seen fewer salamanders than what we have observed before?" While it was a simple question, it also carried a burden. It wasn't a graph or a data set. It was noticing. It was care. And that's the point. Ecological noticing isn't reserved for scientists. It can be anybody that loves a place enough to pay attention. It could be a child lifting a log and finding a salamander, or it could be an angler realizing that water feels differently than what it used to. We as humans are wired for connection, for meaning. When we share what we see, we remind each other that we are a part of the same story. It is the health of the wetlands that isn't about salamanders themselves. It is about us, our communities, in the future. So the main question is, what can you do? Start small. You can walk around in the rain and notice what's around you. You can hear the sounds, observe the silence, the small lives moving through the dark. You can join a local restoration project to help wetlands breathe again. If you live near a place where a salamander crosses roads in the spring, you can join a salamander crossing brigade, or you can create your own. All you need is a flashlight, a reflective vest, and an hour. It doesn't even have to be an hour. On a rainy night, you can save dozens of lives. The actions that I mentioned may feel small, but the ripple expands outwards. A child watching learns that care matters. A community restoring a wetland discovers that floodwaters lose their force, wildlife returning, and the night fills airs with songs. When we notice together, we remember that we are part of the same story. You don't need to be a scientist to protect wetlands. You just need to notice, care, and act. And here's the hope. Every step that we take, no matter how small, it ripples outward. Together, our care can restore the balance, to bring back voices to the night, and ensure wetlands remain places of wonder for generations yet to walk their path. So, I will leave you with this. Find your salamander. Notice what's around you. Let it remind you that the health of the smallest voices is tied to the health of us all. That is the story that we can write together.